Hello, and welcome to another faction guide for Divide et Impera, the mod for Rome 2. Today we're going to be looking at the Odrysian Kingdom, which is a rather challenging faction at the beginning of the game, but if you play your cards right, it can become very strong for late game. Their units are absolutely wonderful, and the roster is quite varied and powerful. However, they do also have a rather challenging start position, full of diplomatic mishaps, and potentially wars against factions that are much stronger than yourself. So let's look at the start position and figure out how we can survive it as the Odrysian Kingdom. Alright, so this is the start position for the Odrysian Kingdom, and right from the onset you can see that you only have one settlement, and it is a minor settlement too, so you're not an incredibly powerful faction by any means, but you do have a couple of positive attributes in this settlement that I do want to go over. One of them is that you start out with a trained slaves resource, which, while it doesn't give you a lot of income, like say something like gold, it does come with one particular bonus that I really like, which is minus 20% slave unrest in all of your provinces. And this means that when you're going about your campaign, you can sack cities without concern about taking too many slaves, because minus 20% to slave unrest will help you out a lot. Usually when you're playing a Rome 2 campaign in this mod, if you ransom captives too much or you just like loot too many cities, you eventually will have a lot of slave revolts. But when I was playing my Odrysian campaign, I almost had none, just because of that buff that you get from the very beginning. So that's obviously a very useful part of this settlement. The other thing is that you do start out with a rather warlike population. In fact, you have 1,500 elites, as you can see, and a little bit over 4,500 warriors. And that's an insane amount of recruitable, militarily strong population to get from the very onset. Much more than I've seen with any other faction. So that kind of plays into this idea that the Thracians are an incredibly warlike people, but they absolutely desire and love conflict, and it's reflected in these population statistics. However, that's where the positives of this settlement does end, because you also spawn into a rather complicated diplomatic situation. As you can see, to your north lie the capricious and often unreliable and aggressive nomadic people. Watch out, these guys could just randomly declare war on you and send a full fleet of horse archers to try to take Odessos. In my campaign, that's precisely what they did. In other campaigns I tried, would just randomly declare war and try to attack me over here in Thrace. So nomadic incursions are a regularity in Thracian history, and you do have to be wary of this happening. The other thing is that you can't exactly trust your Thracian neighbors either. It's not like you have some sort of cultural hegemony with them that will lead to no wars. In fact, it might breed nothing but conflicts, because you have a very similar amount of power as them. So be wary of your neighbors. They could randomly declare war on you, although you do start out with one very positive relationship with Tylus here. And if you want to, you can strengthen it with an additional trade agreement. Otherwise, the faction to yourself, who are basically identical to you, will also most likely entertain a trade agreement. Let's see if we can get one. Now, they just want non-aggression, but also it does demonstrate that they will go for non-aggression. The Bithynians, I don't think that they're going to want anything, but later in the campaign they could warm up to you. The thing is that you can make friends with these guys quite easily if you wish. However, you may not want to. You may just want to attack, of course. It's really up to you how you want to play this campaign out, because I really see two different options when it comes to the Odrysian start position. You can either make alliances with these guys and collectively try to attack the Macedonians, or of course you could just take for territory and then try to use your newfound wealth to attack the Macedonians on your own. Or what you could do is make alliances with these guys to get them off your back, and then go north and attack the Dacians. And that's what I favor, because the thing is that the Macedonians here to your south, you can't see them. They are the boogeyman in this campaign, in this early start position. They are the metaphorical monster that sleeps under your mattress. These guys will obliterate you in open battle in your early game, and you don't have the money to make more than one army either, so you're going to be going toe-to-toe with them with around equal numbers in any battle, and they're going to have heavily armored pikemen, hoplites, elite cavalry. They'll have a professional army for this time period. Meanwhile, your early roster does represent a motley mix of nearly undisciplined tribesmen. I mean, look at what you have here, guys. You have this Thracian footman, which has a mere 8 armor. Compare this to the 35 armor of a standard Macedonian pike unit, of which a Macedonian army will probably have 8 to 10 of. And these guys just won't stand a chance. They won't stand a chance against armored hoplites. They won't stand a chance against pikemen. You'll have to absolutely outsmart and outmaneuver a Macedonian army to even come close to winning. You do have these long spear peltists that do recruit from your warrior class, but these are basically like short spear. Like, they're spearmen that use like a short spear and no formation attack. They're not going to beat hoplites or pikemen, alright? They're good like against cavalry on the flanks, but they're not a mainline unit that's capable of beating Macedonians. You're simply outmatched in early game. So yeah, what I would do is befriend your local Thracians, get non-aggression pacts and stuff like that, allow them to bear the brunt of an initial Macedonian assault and to lose against them, and meanwhile go up north and fight the Dacians. Your early army, while incapable of beating disciplined professional Hellenic units, will annihilate Dacian units in the early game, which are, in my opinion, much worse than you. And I could say that I finished both a Getae and an Odrysian campaign, so I know those factions very well. These footmen will crush Dacian infantry in the early game, so I would just recruit lots of these guys. I would go for your mercenaries, get these Thracian mercenary warriors whenever you can. They're really, really good, and just head up north and conquer Dacia. These guys have a similar culture, and they will absolutely be a great addition to your empire. Because of a similar culture, you won't experience a lot of public order issues, and you'll be able to recruit from their populations right away. Conquer the whole province of Dacia. If you're super rich, you'll get the money that you need, and then head back south, reconquer Thrace from Macedonian hands, and then take Greece itself. That's what I would do. There's really no reason to go into Asia Minor or into nomadic territory as your first conquest. It's just, Dacia will prove so much easier and so much more rewarding and so much safer than confronting the Macedonians right away. But that's my advice when it comes to the early game of Thrace. Now let's look at their faction bonuses as well as their amazing unit roster. Now, the faction bonuses of the Odrysian Kingdom are rather lackluster, so I won't talk about them for very long. You do get +2 public order from Dacio-Thracian and Illyrian culture, so that means that if your culture is dominant in a province, you'll get +2 public order. +2 public order, while nice to have, is not a significant number, so this won't really impact you in your campaign much. Then you have the Civilized Savages trait, which makes converting buildings cheaper. So if you conquer a settlement and they have a different culture, like say it's a Greek settlement, so you have to convert the Greek buildings into Thracian buildings, it'll be cheaper. Again, really not much. Like, you should be able to just make the money to convert buildings on your own, and there's just so much stronger cultural traits in these. So honestly, the Illyrian and Thracian factions, the Dacians, have some of the weakest bonuses when it comes to this, but it is what it is. And when it comes to the Odrysians specifically, you get increased public order from Hellenic culture. That's kind of nice because you're most likely going to conquer Greece and Macedon right away. So why not? It just helps you out when it comes to that. You also get increased morale at night. That's going to help you with ambush battles, but I don't know. I don't really play much of those, so I didn't even really feel the impact of this trait at all in my campaign, but I don't know, perhaps you'll play it slightly different, but again, I don't feel like these are particularly impactful. They're just nice to have. Reduced party loyalty does really, really suck. This is going to incentivize you to switch from a monarchy to an empire where you do get increased party loyalty as quickly as possible. And just in general, civil wars are such an annoyance. So this is just going to make your campaign a little bit more tedious to play, but it's what you're stuck with. Ultimately, I don't feel like these buffs are particularly useful, and reduced party loyalty is just really annoying. But that's what you have to play with the Odrysians. Really nothing much to talk about when it comes to these buffs. And now let's get into the mighty roster of the Odrysians. The reason why this is my favorite faction in Divide et Impera for Rome 2. I just absolutely love his roster, and even though it's not the most powerful, it is, in my opinion, the most charming. So firstly, let's look at your generals. Now, when it comes to your generals, you have a couple of units that you cannot recruit outside of as your general unit, which is always fun. I feel like it gives the general a bit of a spiciness to them, but they otherwise don't have if this is just like a unit that you could spam in normal game. But in any case, what you do have are 2 unique infantry generals that you can't recruit otherwise. One's a long spear guard, one's a Thracian noble Ramphia man. Now, when it comes to long spear guard, I wouldn't really get these guys that often. Like, they do have an amazing 29 charge bonus, which is really unique to a spear, 25 weapon damage, which is once again pretty good for a spear, and 14 melee attack is nothing to scoff at. Those are elite spear stats. 30 armor is not bad either, particularly for a unit in early game. However, these Ramphia men are just so much better. But the real, in my opinion, the real benefit of having the Spearmen is that they're really cheap for a general unit, and we have 4 speed. That makes this general as fast as a archer unit, a generic archer unit. They're as fast as skirmisher guys. I mean, if you're looking for something that can just roam around the battlefield hunting men mercilessly, it's going to be the Spear Guard. But these Ramphia men are just insanely good. I wouldn't say they're overpowered because you can only have max 1 in your army, but I have tested these guys out in custom battles, and they are legitimately the best unit in Rome 2. They are undefeatable. I mean, sure, because they don't have shields, they can get shot to bits by archers before they even get into combat. However, if you can keep them safe from the missiles of your foes and charge them into battle, they will clobber anything. Guys, they beat elite Spartan hoplites, like the general unit for the Spartans, the best Spartan hoplite in the game, or the best hoplite in the game in general, frontally. Like, they can charge into elite Spartan hoplites in phalanx formation frontally, and these guys will beat them because they have an insane 38 charge bonus, the highest of any infantry unit in the game. They have 13 armor penetrating damage, meaning that 13 out of their 25 weapon damage ignores armor entirely. So these guys just melt anything in their path. They also kill elephants mercilessly, which I guess is like a nice bonus. They have 3 speed, which means that they move pretty quick, especially for a heavily armored infantry. And 19 melee attack is insane. It means that they're going to hit most of their hits. Of course, these guys are not particularly strong on the defense, so if these guys like get stuck in combat, meaning that their charge won't really boost their stats anymore, they can get whittled down quite steadily. However, I've gotten like 500, 600 kills with these guys in battles repeatedly. They are so crazy. So when it comes to your general, I feel like you have very little reason to recruit anything other than the noble Ramphia men. These guys are absolutely insane. They will win you battles single-handedly. Get these guys. They look sick as well. They're just amazing. Now moving on to your melee infantry, this is by far the strongest aspect of this roster. However, they get progressively better as time goes on in your campaign, and in early game you have pretty limited options. So in early game you're going to have these Thracian levies, and you're going to have these Thracian footmen. I would pretty much never recruit the levies because they just suck. They have 1 armor, 7 attack, 5 defense, 19 charge, which is nothing exceptional. They're really cheap, but they also only have a 36 base morale, meaning that they are going to rout with ease at virtually any provocation. They also don't have any javelins too, which makes them additionally useless because of that. There's just no positive attribute to these guys other than they are very cheap. So if you're looking for some sort of cheap kind of buffer unit to put into maybe a garrison army, you know, you just have like a little army roving around a province trying to maintain public order, you can go for the Thracian levies. But these guys really suck otherwise. The only positive thing is that they do some armor penetrating damage, but their attack stats are so poor that this isn't really going to impact you positively all that much. Next are your Thracian footmen, and these guys are probably going to make up the bulk of your early game army. These Thracian footmen are quite good, and whenever you recruit these guys in early game, they do automatically get an experience chevron. I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest, but in my campaign, that's what was happening. Maybe it was because of my general stats or something, like maybe you had like a trait or something. But when they have an experience chevron, they get 10 attack and 9 melee defense, which is good. But even when you look at them otherwise, they have 9 melee defense, Sorry, 9 melee attack, 8 melee defense, which is reasonably good for like an early game unit. Also, these guys draw from your third population class, meaning that you can recruit these guys at will. There's basically no restraint on your recruitment. But other than that, they have 21 charge bonus, which is really good for early game, as well as 21 weapon damage and 7 armor penetrating damage. And this 21 melee damage and 7 armor penetrating damage, as well as this 2 bonus versus infantry, which just adds to this attack basically, is the reason why they're really good. Like in basically all of my battles, I would just run these guys in frontally against like early game Celtic infantry, early game Dacian infantry, early game steppe infantry, like whatever barbaric culture surrounded me, I would just confront them frontally with these guys and they would always win. Just these little subtle bonuses, the armor penetration and the bonus versus infantry, would put these guys over basically any equivalent unit. Now, the trouble with these guys is the low armor. They can get obliterated by skirmishers because of this. And of course, they also have pretty low morale, so if they start dying in droves, and this low armor as well as low melee defense will ensure that they do die in droves if you don't use them properly, they can run away. So you have to make sure to get good engagements from the onset of your battle. Like, you have to be tactically intelligent when you use these guys and get good fights. You know, don't run uphill and not get your charge bonus properly. But as long as you get your charge, you engage properly, these guys will win. So that's how you use them, really. Just be smart with them. Once you get the Feroz reform in turn 60, you get a direct upgrade with these Thracian Feroz infantry. We also recruit from your third population class, and they're literally just a direct upgrade on these guys. They get more armor, they get more morale. They're basically the Thracians once they've had some success at conquering, and now they're just more wealthy, more prosperous. The state is more able to equip their men in better fashion. And of course they're heavier, but they still maintain the same movement speed, which is nice. And just like these guys will defeat most equivalent infantry frontally, so will these Feroz infantry. Feroz infantry is just generally very good. I'd also use them as a main line. Now, if you do have more money and you do upgrade your barrack to a higher level, you can get these D swordsmen, or sword masters, rather. And they are a direct upgrade on the Thracian footmen in virtually every regard. Like for medium instead of light, they have more attack, they have more defense, they charge better, they do more weapon damage. For armor penetration and bonus versus infantry is the same, but unlike these guys who are virtually unarmored, these guys have a pretty solid 30 armor. 30 armor is nothing to scoff at, guys. There's Roman units with similar armor to this. And a base morale of 45, which is also quite good. The only negative part about these is that they are very expensive to maintain, and when I was doing my Thracian campaign, I just preferred to spam cheaper armies rather than focus on having too much quality in my army. So I didn't really use these guys much because of it, but ultimately these guys are a very competent unit. Don't underestimate them. They will be very useful if you recruit a couple of them, but they also come from your upper class, I think either your warrior class or your noble population class. So watch out. Watch out with over-recruiting them. They can drive you towards bankruptcy. The next unit, and I think the reason I didn't use the D-Swordsmen much is because they are basically just an upgraded version of this. Like, they do serve the same purpose in battle as kind of a solid mainline that, you know, they're going to hit hard in the charge, they're going to do well in combat. However, they don't like being too bogged down. No Thracian unit likes being too bogged down. They're not like Romans that'll grind units out. Like, all Thracian units kind of have this shock attribute to them. But when it comes to shock attribute, why not just go all the way rather than kind of be in the middle, like with these D Swords Masters, and get the Thracian Romphia Warriors? Now, the early iteration of these guys that you can recruit from turn 1, at least once you get the better barracks, so I guess like turn 10 or so, once you get the research for it. But the guys available in early campaign are a light unit, so you do have to be a little bit, how do I put this, careful about using them, because they don't have shields, so they don't block missiles. They have 25 armor, which is decent, but not a lot, and they are light. So if these guys get trampled by cavalry, if they get shot too many times, they will become useless. However, if you charge them into combat, and they didn't get destroyed beforehand, they slaughter anything, guys. 13 melee armor penetrating damage, a massive 36 charge bonus, 17 melee attack. 25 weapon damage. These guys are absurdly powerful. They will demolish anything on the charge. So long as you keep them safe, these guys will go in and obliterate anything. I really can't talk about how useful these guys are enough, guys. Like, if you can use them properly, these are the most powerful units in the game. And of course, the Noble is just a better version of it. But if you have a couple of these guys alongside the Noble, you can beat anyone. You can beat anyone with the proper tactics. Now, moving onwards. Once you get to turn 120, you get better versions of the Ramphia warriors. Of these late Ramphia warriors. Now, these guys just have proper armor. Instead of 25, they have 38. I think they charge... Actually, they charge the same. Weapon damage the same. I think the only difference is armor, I think, and morale. Because they're late game. But having more armor is just a luxury with these guys. You don't have to be as concerned about them. You don't have to coddle them as much. They're just more powerful with more armor. And the late warriors, these guys do come from your second population class. And actually, this unit used to have 225 men. Now they only have 150. Which is interesting. We did nerf the Thracians a little bit by changing this unit, because this one used to have 225, but the same exact stats. Now it's just 150. But I can see why, because it used to beat Romans routinely with the old iteration of this unit. Now, ever more balanced. But these guys are extremely powerful. They're going to be your main line in late game. Just like with other Thracian sword units, you don't want to let them get bogged down, because they only have 11 melee defense compared to the standard 15 or 16 that Romans have. But 24 charge bonus is really good, 25 weapon damage is quite high, 7 armor penetrating damage is, once again, it's really good. It will turn the tide of an infantry engagement for you, even if you don't recognize it. And these guys do have 35 armor, which is very strong. The typical late game swordsman has 38, so there's only 3 under, yet they offer significantly better aggressive statistics, or like, offensive statistics. So these guys will serve you very well. So that's what it is when it comes to the melee infantry roster. If you use a solid mix of the sword units combined with the Ramphias, you can have an extremely aggressive and impactful main line. And you do have some very cheap options when it comes to these Furos and regular footmen. But also, the more top-of-the-line units of the Thracians can be extremely impactful. Now when it comes to Spearmen, you have a Thracian Light Spearmen. These guys are your generic militia. In particular, these guys suck. The Thracian Light Spearmen, I mean, 6 melee attack and 12 defense along with 1 armor is horrible. The only good thing about these guys is they do have a 13 bonus versus Cavalry, and they are extremely cheap, so they're good for maintaining public order. Now, you do have the Longspear Pelthas. These guys are recruitable from turn 1, and they do have some pretty decent stats. 6 armor penetrating, 13 bonus versus Cavalry, 10 attack, 10 defense, and 23 charge bonus. These guys are really, really good. The only negative is that they have only 20 armor, and they do come from your warrior class, your second population class. However, they do provide additional morale compared to your Thracian footmen, and they aren't too expensive to maintain, but they are also a light unit that only numbers 150 men. So I would have a couple of these guys. They are a decent kind of auxiliary unit to help out the Thracian footmen hold better, as well as protect their flanks. And they will beat most early game infantry in direct combat. However, these guys won't help you against like phalangists, pikemen, hoplites. They really won't help you in a combat against foes. Once you get to Furos Reform in turn 60, you just get an upgraded version of these that are even better. These guys do have better armor, better stats in every regard, so you just upgrade these directly to these. And now, I think in turn 120, you get these Colonist 4-axe spears. And I'm going to lump these guys in with the same Colonist hoplites and pikes that you get. Same categories as these guys. Essentially, the Thracians get access to these Colonist units that draw from your foreigner population class, which is really, really nice. And these guys are basically generic versions of the similar Greek units. So These colonist 4-axe spears, they're pretty good at holding the line in late game. They will be a better mainline when it comes to like a defensive battle than say these Peltis, maybe swordsmen. So if you're looking to make a more defensive army build, use these 4-axe spears. They just hold forever, but they also don't kill much. Hoplites, I don't know why you'd use hoplites when it comes to the Odrysians. I mean, they are the first colonist unit that you get access to really quickly. Like, you just need to upgrade one of your naval buildings to get these. So I guess compared to the rest of his roster, they are going to be the best defensive unit. So I guess if you want them for that, that's great. But they're not going to help you against the Macedonians because they'll have pikes, and pikes directly counter hoplites. I basically never used the hoplites. But once you get the pikemen, these are really cool. They are worse than Macedonian pikemen slightly. They have 5 less armor, but that doesn't really matter. It's just such a luxury to have pikes in this army because you already have extremely good shock infantry. You already have extremely competent sword infantry that have that extra spiciness with the armor penetration. But to have pikes alongside these means that you can basically make, like, you can make an army with a pike core, but then have extremely powerful swords alongside it. It's just the compositions you can make with these pikes make a better mix of troops in an actual Macedonian army. So just such a luxury to have the pikes. Now moving on to your missiles, I'm going to run through these pretty quick because they're nothing special. You have Thracian Javelin Men. These guys are extremely cheap, but they suck. 80 range is really bad. 20 missile damage is less than your average Peltis. These guys only have 1 armor. They're extremely cheap though, so if you're trying to buff a garrison before a desperate battle, these guys can be helpful for that, but otherwise, they're absolute crap. Thracian Slingers, these guys suck, they're horrible. 1 armor, 165 range, which is the lowest range that slingers can have. These guys are terrible, but don't even have extra men like Egyptian slingers do. Absolutely useless, don't use them. Thracian Archers, I mean, these suck just like the slingers do, but they're not as bad in my opinion, because at least 165 range is kind of like normal for an archer, and they do 15 weapon damage, which is better than 9. The only case I would use them is if you're fighting the steppe tribes and you just need foot archers for whatever reason. But like, otherwise never use these guys. They're horrible archers. They will lose to almost any other archer in the game. Next thing, you have Thracian Peltis. Now Thracian Peltis are decent in terms of their melee combat stats, because they have 9 melee attack, which is pretty good, and a charge bonus of 21, which is useful, 21 weapon damage as well, 7 melee armor penetrating damage. I mean, these guys are pretty good, and 15 armor is nothing to scoff at. I would definitely use the Thracian Peltis as a nice supportive unit for your melee infantry line. If you have like 3 of these in your army or something, they'll definitely help you out. The melee Peltis, they're an area recruitment unit, so I'm not going to cover them, but they're very similar to your regular Thracian Peltis. They're just a little bit more expensive, but also offer greater melee capabilities at the expense of skirmishing capabilities, because they have slightly less range, but their melee stats are really, really good for a skirmish unit, so I would get a couple of these, because if you're going to be extremely aggressive and quick with your infantry, as their stats kind of dictate, you probably want skirmishers that can also go in and run into combat. Speaking of that, your noble Peltis, they're just the best of both worlds. I mean, 13 melee attack and 10 melee defense, as well as 25 armor. 24 charge bonus? Guys, these guys charge harder than most Roman legionaries do. They charge harder than most Germanic swordsmen do. These guys are just incredible at melee, and they have a luxurious 4 speed as well. As well as, you know, they just throw in 7 javelins that do 23 missile damage, which is a crazy amount of damage. Like, these guys are a luxury, but they're also extremely expensive, so that's kind of the trouble with them. You can't really recruit too many of them. They're also going to come from your first population class, as their name suggests, you know. Any unit with noble in their name will probably come from the first population class. So if you want to spend as much money as these guys cost on a Peltis, which is kind of questionable, so you probably want to spend more money on actual infantry that are going to win you the battle. But if you do want to spend them on a Peltis and just make like a fully elite army in your campaign, these guys are definitely well worth the money. Just once you get them into melee, they're basically like a D swordsman that can also skirmish, which is really cool. Now moving on to your cavalry, the Thracians do have some pretty competent cavalry options, however, they're by no means a dominant cavalry faction. The first cavalry that you get are the shock cavalry, which, unlike the name suggests, they don't have lances, they just come in with a short spear and a shield. However, these guys do have a pretty impressive 47 charge bonus as well as a 26 weapon damage. They also deal armor penetrating damage, so I don't know. I guess they kind of have some falxes amongst them. I don't know why they do armor penetrating damage, but I won't question it. They also have 4 ammunition, so they kind of do play the role of like what is it called? The Tarentine Cavalry. They do kind of behave like a Tarentine Cavalry. They're even in the same price range. Actually, you know what? When I do look at their statistics, they literally have identical stats to a Tarentine Cavalry. Guys, the Shock Cavalry is a Tarentine Cavalry. Treat it like a Tarentine Cavalry. They're a very flexible unit. They're good for skirmishing, good for wiping out missile infantry, and of course, they're good for a rear charge, but don't keep them in combat too long because their base morale is only 39, and the 23 armor will go down pretty quickly. Next, we have Furos Shock Cavalry. As the name suggests, you unlock them with the Furos reforms, and they're literally just an upgrade on these guys in every single way. They're just a little bit slower, but they'll last longer in combat and will do better against enemy cavalry, so definitely worth the upgrade. Next, we have the Tribali Lancers. Now, these guys are available in the early campaign. You just need to upgrade your barrack to get them. Now, these Tribali Lancers are really weird because they have 0 ammunition, yet they have the trait Fire Whilst Moving, which means that you can fire ammunition while moving, but you have 0 ammunition. So what the heck's the point of these guys? Now, here's a weird thing about them, okay? They're the crappiest unit at using their lances that I've ever seen, because virtually every Lancer cavalry in this game has a 60 charge bonus, but these guys only have 54. Usually a Lancer has a minimum of 13 melee attack, but, you know, sometimes the better ones will have a 15 melee attack if they're good, so either 13 or 15. These guys have 11. They have like the lowest melee attack out of any Lancer I've seen in this game, while maintaining the same melee defense as any Lancer. Now, what this Lancer does do is they have 4 melee armor penetrating damage and 3 bonus infantry, the same sleeper stats that make your infantry good. Yet, because these guys are a Lancer, they're gonna do pretty poorly in a long-term melee confrontation against any type of, like, melee cavalry. Like, any cavalry unit with a shield will slaughter these guys in long-term combat. The only thing that these sleeper stats will help is it'll help the Lancers against infantry in long-term combat. They'll still lose, guys, they'll still lose, and it'll help them defeat another Lancer in long-term combat. I don't know if that's actually helpful. That's a very specific situation. It's a very niche skill to have. But yeah, this is basically an anti-Lancer Lancer. So use that for what it is, but these guys aren't... I mean, I'm not going to say they're terrible, because you can just use them as a typical Lancer. Like, they'll do a worse job at it, but because your infantry are so good at shocking your opponent and killing other infantry quickly with their insane charge bonuses, if you just do a hammer and anvil, even with a weaker Lancer, you're still going to win. You're just going to annihilate the enemy. No one can resist that type of frontal force. So I guess you could still just use the Lancer for what it is, but I don't know. That's what it is. So moving on, you have your Thracian Noble Cavalry. These guys are a pretty decent melee cavalry unit. I mean, if you just look at their stats, just down the line, they're good. Good charge bonus, good weapon damage. Now, these guys don't have a shield. At least your initial Thracian Noble Cavalry don't, but they have 2 volleys of javelins, as well as they have those sleeper stats, the bonus infantry, the armor penetration damage. So these guys will be a very competent melee cavalry. They'll beat most cavalry in melee combat, so they're just good. They are very expensive to maintain, but they'll do the trick. Your late game 4X cavalry, really freaking good. Absolute beast of a unit. I won so many battles against Rome that just hinged on these guys obliterating Roman cavalry with ease, and that's what they did. Because 16 melee attack and 12 melee defense is really good for a cavalry unit, as well as 10 armor penetrating damage. I don't know any other cavalry unit that does 10 armor penetrating damage. Of course, they only have 46 charge, which is of course good, but in the context of cavalry, it's not really that good. So these guys are more of a long-term fight in combat cavalry. They're definitely not a shock cavalry. They're definitely not going to have a shock value. But you already have literal shock cavalry for that. And also, speaking of that, this shock cavalry and the Freo shock cavalry comes from your 3rd population class. There aren't very many factions that recruit cavalry from their 3rd population class. So if you want cheap cavalry, go for these guys. If you want expensive cavalry, go for these. These guys are on the top shelf. That's really all we need to talk about. Now when it comes to Thracian javelin cavalry, which is kind of the stereotype of what Thracian cavalry is, you have your regular javelin cav, and you have your upgraded medium cavalry, which you get with the Feroce reforms. These guys are really nothing special, to be honest. They have very bad armor in general. They're absolutely nothing special in this mod. I mean, they'll do their job. They'll play the role of javelin cavalry, but I would honestly never get these. I don't think that they're really useful compared to this shock cavalry, because ultimately, like, your infantry, because they're kind of lower armor, high shock value, they're either going to destroy the enemy infantry or lose against them very quickly. So it's better just to throw your cavalry in and actually allow them to quickly make a difference than throw in skirmish cavalry that'll take a while to actually make their impact felt. You know, you need your battles to last a little bit longer to properly use your skirmish cavalry. So I would just refrain from using these and use your shock cavalry. Now when it comes to my verdict, I honestly believe the Odrysians to be an extremely powerful faction, particularly if you like fast-paced battles that are won and lost in like 5-10 minutes. The Odrysians are masters of such battles when you just kind of run in and you just try to overwhelm your opponent. And they'll do a sick job of that. Simultaneously, their infantry are so special and unique because of all that armor penetrating that they will do wonders against the Romans. Like, I didn't even feel like the Romans were a tough opponent in my campaign. The Odrysians just perfectly counter them. They're absolute Roman killing machines. So because of that, I really can't say that the Odrysians are in any ways weak, because if you can dumpster the Romans with ease, the most powerful faction in this game undisputedly, then you're clearly working with gas. Plus having strong infantry and strong phalanxes is pretty unique, and just, it's an absolute wombo combo of pain, as well as, like I mentioned, pretty good cavalry. So in terms of power, I'm going to get the Odrysians a 10 out of 10. My bias, of course, I just love the Odrysians, but they're not lacking in any category other than long-range skirmishers, but of course, if you're Noble Peltas as well as Thracian Peltas, they still have the Peltas category on lock. So I would give them a 10 out of 10. If you know how to use them properly, this faction's unbeatable. In terms of how much you need to play this campaign, I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. I highly recommend it because they're my favorite faction. They're in no means historically significant of a faction, so there isn't like a whole lot of roleplay potential in my opinion, unless you just really like the history of Lysinicus and his break-off rump state that didn't last very long, but like, I don't know, unless you're like an absolute nerd about the Diadochi era, I don't think you'll know what that is. The Thracians obviously didn't have a lot of monumental cultural achievements or anything, so yeah, the roleplay value really isn't that high. Otherwise, in terms of like gameplay mechanics, I mean, just rushing in and being really aggressive with your infantry, you can do that with a lot of other factions. You don't really need to play the Thracians, but I just found their infantry so rewarding to use, and I also really like their start position, because you kind of like power up and then go and fight the giant, you know, the Macedonian giant, which is kind of cool. It is pretty cool to start out in Thrace too, because then you can expand out to Asia Minor, you can go fight the nomads. There are just so many ways that you can go, so because of that, I feel like it is a pretty good campaign to play, but you absolutely don't need to play it to get a good Rome 2 experience. In terms of difficulty, I would give it a 5 out of 10. Start position's a little bit hard just because factions can declare war on you en masse. Like, if you get declared war on by your local Thracian factions, the Scythians, the Macedonians, you will be in trouble. It's not like a bunch of Thracian footmen are going to be able to suppress all of these invasions that become simultaneously, and they absolutely can, and you can absolutely overextend yourself. But simultaneously, if you get an economy rolling and you unlock these better melee infantry units as well as this cavalry, it's kind of game over. Like, you can absolutely obliterate as the Thracians. So because of that, I feel like it's like a perfectly average campaign in terms of difficulty, and by late game, if you survive till then, it becomes a pretty easy campaign. But that's really all I have to say about the Odrysians. I hope you found this guide to be informative. Please like and subscribe the video. And yeah, I'll see you in the next guide. Thanks for watching.